Welcome to the JAMODI podcast. We are all surrounded by amazing coaches and leaders. So let's get an inside look at not just what they do, but how they do what they do. After all, becoming the best versions of ourselves is JAMODI, just a matter of doing it. Coaches, the JAMODI podcast is sponsored by 3on3 Hoops Hub. 3on3 Hoops Hub has run over 350 3on3 basketball leagues for kids since 1997. 3on3 is the ideal format for players to get a lot of opportunities, work on all skills and positions, and have fun with their friends. Whether you want to build your program, raise some funds, or start your own business, you can bring 3on3 to your community and do it like an expert by learning from the best with 3on3 Hoops Hub's free 90-minute training. You can register at the link in the show notes. So when I ask you about what's one thing that makes your program different, the cool thing is you can really draw from a few different places. You can draw from when you were coaching or your teams that you've had. You can also draw from the basketball immersion program that you run, but then also maybe from some great leaders that you've talked to. So what does make a program different?
Well, as you said, the basketball podcast in particular, having, 200 plus conversations with coaches from different levels and around the world. Think about that just every day. And I frame it for you as this, as if I had a team, it'd be really hard to do that because it's almost too many ideas and too many things that make you think and too many things that make you go, is there a better way?
Yeah.
So for me, it's more, an accumulation of all this knowledge without having to direct it specifically to one team. So I think that helps me refine it in a way that, say, a coach that's in the moment, especially in the season, has a harder time doing, because it's really hard to add or subtract during the season, and nor should you necessarily do that a ton. You got to go with what brought you there and what you believe in and your philosophy and some of those things. So for me, what makes what I do unique now is just, again, the diversity of information that comes my way, and then the diversity of information that I then try and make practical for coaches. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's really what's made Basketball Immersion, and I'm assuming Basketball Podcast, a brand for people to go to, because it's not just a content dump. It's content that has purpose. It's content that is aligned with evidence-based ideas. And it's certainly content that is practical and applicable for a coach, because, again, I wanted to create a one-stop shopping area for coaches, because I know how hard it is. Matt, you and I, and any other coach that coaches, there's almost, I don't know if I was a young person nowadays. I always say this to Alex Sarama, who helps me with Basketball Immersion. I don't know if I was a young person nowadays, if I could function. There's just too much information, too many things that you can access online, that it's like, wow, my mind would blow up probably. So I think I'm grateful for this point, having gone through the process of coaching and now being able to amalgamate that information for others.
That's such a great point. And so what do we do, Coach? Because I've actually had a coach contact me, a friend of mine that started going through, I'm way early. You mentioned you're 200 plus. I'm just in the 40s right now, and really learning on the fly. I'm just a high school coach, learning how to do this and enjoying talking hoops with others. But he said, Matt, there's just so many good things that people are doing. How do I do it all? How do I add? What do I know what to do? What's kind of your advice for a guy that, goes through the list of guests that you've had and all the materials that you have, and is just feeling overwhelmed with what's out there?
Well, I think it all connects back to your core. And I think coaches, no matter, probably with the exception of maybe just a brand new coach, most coaches have a core of things, where principles of offense, or it's, concepts on defense, or it's their core values and those things. And by and large, certainly we can shift those things. Certainly we can add or subtract to those things. But by and large, I'd say that's our consistent structure. And I'll give you an analogy that's similar to teaching offense, is that I believe, even though I believe in freedom and creativity for players, I do believe that starts from structure. So let's say I'm teaching them a structure, a spacing template, say like the two-side fast break. I'm going to teach them the template, but then gradually what's going to happen is we're going to move from that structure to less structure. So structured to unstructured. And that's a huge goal of that process that we go through on offense. And then with that, when I connect that back to what you asked, for me, it's like, okay, I have these core values or these principles of play, and I believe in those. And that's my structure. But from there, when I learn all these things, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to get a little less structured and unstructured at times as I collect this information. And then what I'll do with that information is gradually I'll add and subtract. And, I mean, you and I, we're old enough to know lists. And it's like, you start with a big list and then you gradually subtract and then you gradually subtract and then it gets down to the most important things. And that's really the process that I go through basically every day that I learn. And only add the most important things. And it could be something like a new idea, or it could be something in terms of how you or another coach phrases things. And I would say that's the superpower that I've been blessed with, is that ability to be able to hear phrasing and say, okay, that's just better than how I say it. And now I'll adapt that.
But you do have to know, like you mentioned, your core and what style of play or what type of and style of play that works for the players that you have, but also that you believe in, that gets you excited, that joy that you have from teaching freedom and creativity with your team. Your players just feed off of that. And I've just seen in myself, like I listen to coaches, I go to clinics, and what they're doing just makes so much sense and it looks so good. But then I've got to be careful not to try to add too much in, because simplicity is where a lot of this, where we're talking about creativity and where it lives, in my opinion.
Well, and that's absolutely true. And I give, wisdom simplifies, but is preceded by messiness and struggle, is really how I would say it. Like this wisdom that we ultimately get to as a coach or as a player or as a person, it's, the goal is that it's simple, because wisdom really in the end is what that means, is it's simple. Yeah. It means something to us, and it's very purposeful and all those different things that come with it. But that's always preceded by messiness and struggle. And I think coaches sometimes, I think one of the struggles they get into is they try and skip those steps. But the messiness and the struggle and the confusion, that's all part of the process. And I think about all the way back to my school days, the projects that gave me the most trouble were the ones that left me with the most learning or the most meaning, because I had to struggle and I had to fight for my learning. And that's something that, again, I encourage coaches to consider when it comes to their players. We don't want to cheat them out of those opportunities, because sometimes we can structure them so much, not just with, say, an offensive structure, but also with our words and our teaching and our lessons. Like you and I, we're really good. Like we can give coaching clinics to our players, but we cheat them out of their opportunities for the messiness and struggle, which leads to permanence and leads to their solution instead of our solution. So, as a simple thing, I mean, I just encourage, if you teach an offense, once your players know the offense, just encourage them to go off script. And that could be a segment of practice. That could be a day of practice, but gradually just encourage them to go off script, because that's as simple as it gets from going from structure to unstructured. And that's going to make your offense better. Now, again, it's a buffet. Not every player can go off script, or, because that's a high school situation.
You
right?
don't want little Timmy trying a few things.
Yeah, like you got 2 or 3 players that are coming off another season, basketball. Yeah. They're just good athletes that play basketball. Yeah, they don't get the same to eat the same at the buffet as the players that are basketball players. And that's a part of it too. And that's sometimes misconstrued about what we're talking about in terms of freedom and creativity. Not every player earns that, because not every player is a full-time basketball player, especially when we're talking at the youth levels.
I think that's a great reminder, even for coaches that maybe they're not as much, they're not teaching more of a conceptual offense, but it's more of, they have a list of plays that they love and that's their go-tos. But I used to direct for PGC, and one thing we would always tell our players is, even though you're running plays, don't turn your brain off. Continue to look and hunt for opportunities or advantages. I think that's a reminder for us coaches, even if you don't want to go the route that I feel like you've gone, and I know I have we teach a structure, but within that, guys, there's just possibilities, and it's a canvas that you can really find your way on. And to me, it's the most fun. But to encourage your players within the plays that we're running, have the freedom to break it off and to see an advantage and to go for it. What are your thoughts on that?
Basketball decisions supersede basketball plays. Basketball decisions supersede basketball plays. That's a simple phrasing that I've come up with recently that I think just, again, nails that for me and nails it for players to be able to understand that at the end of the day, a decision will that we want decisions. We want decisions that lead to advantage. Now, your principle plays, say if we're talking about offense, but same thing on defense. I want decisions on defense. And I find we're too structured sometimes on defense as well. So freedom on both ends comes from that structure. But then once they got that structure, creating this unstructure really leads to, this ability to be able to say your decision supersedes the structure. And let's give an example on offense. Okay, you catch the ball, you have an advantage, say it's a shoulder to chest advantage on a defender. Even though you're supposed to make that next pass to run the play, you see space, and you can phrase it however you want, but we would say if you see space because you have this shoulder to chest advantage, attack it, right? We want to create that advantage. We created the advantage. Now we have the advantage, take advantage of the advantage, and then everyone plays off of that. And that's where I think, the play after the play, whether this is penetration reaction, post reaction, offensive rebounding reaction systems, those are almost more important than the actual initial play. And that's a big part of what we're trying to share in terms of what you said, trying to bring that home for coaches.
I've heard of so much, and I've thought about too much structure on offense, but you said something a second ago. I don't think I've ever thought about too much structure on defense. Can you explain that a little bit more? Like, where do you see that, and in what situations?
Well, so many situations. I mean, let's be honest. The defense, and this is an old Chuck Dalyism, I think, originally, but the defense doesn't break down in the help; it breaks down in the recovery. Well, recovery is messy, and the problem is if we can get really structured at the point of the ball. Okay, we're one pass away in help. You're in this perfect position. You're in this perfect position, and that's fine when it's just this shell scenario. But in a game situation, the offense creates an advantage. We have to take away that advantage. And most of that has to do with the offense tries to create space. We want to take away space. So that's where defensive decision-making comes in. And, we teach, it's the same concept. Say we teach early in the year, we're trying to teach perfect rotations to our players. As we progress, we try and talk to them about there's no perfect rotation. It's the first person that talks is right. And the first person to get there tells the next person what to do. And it's this kind of defensive decision making that I believe has always made our defense a little bit stronger because, instead of this perfect structure, you've got to just overcome, the offensive advantage. And that's really a big set. So advantage drills, like any type of advantage drills, 4-on-3, for example, those teach defensive decision making. I don't know, Matt, are you spending a ton of time in advantage drills telling you, like stopping the defense and telling them, hey, you screwed up. You should have done this. There's no wrong. It's like you're screwed if you don't just compete.
Yeah.
You got to compete.
Find a way. Figure it out. Don't give up. Keep moving. Adjust.
Totally. And that's what good defense is, to be honest.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, and that's from the NBA on down. You'll see coaches, like, they may not admit it because everyone wants to have like this perfect defense. And we always talk about backline, this perfect defense. Well, wait a minute. What happens if they get past the initial help? Then it's in the recovery, and that's for all defense. So
shell always looks good when the offense isn't moving and they're only moving the ball around the perimeter after 1,000. That's when shell looks really good.
Hey, Matt, I'm not anti-shell, Joe, but I'm anti-staying there.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. I think coaches stay in shell too long. Like shell is great for that initial, structure.
Terminology, that, get your terminology out. Yeah.
Yeah. But after that, I mean, it's like, let's play a little bit more like shell. Let's go one rotation. Now it's live, or just create the scenario that you got to work on it. Those type of things.
But what you said about on those advantage games, we're all, 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s, 4-on-3s, like because of the offense we run, we live in those spaces quite a bit, but I've never thought about that. We are teaching defensive principles from that, and probably, or not just teaching it, our players are going through them and learning how to adjust, how to see a need and fill a need instantly. And so that gave me a lot of freedom that you mentioned that, because I love valuing time for these small-sided games, but then in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, we still have all of these defensive checklists that I have to get done. Maybe I'm doing them in that time.
You're doing them more than you realize, especially again, like this two-way coaching, two-way teaching type of concept. And that's the one advantage that I say about playing more basketball in practice is that, and by basketball, I'm saying offense versus defense, because basketball transfers to basketball. Like, I'm not sure if your, on air defensive drill, closeout drill transfers much to basketball beyond maybe, again, communicating your language or your needs. But what we know is playing basketball transfers to basketball. So this concept of two-way teaching, and even if you're focused on one area, say offense more than the defense, you're still getting meaningful reps. And most importantly, you're getting perceptual reps. Like, your defenders are getting perception reps of, what do I perceive? What do I decide based on what I perceive? And then what do I execute because of that? And that's really important. And, that's why I can't encourage coaches enough to play more basketball. One, players enjoy it. And two, It does connect these things for you.
Coach, are you saying that it's okay for our players to have fun in practice? That's okay?
And we can define fun how we want to define it, but like, smiles are okay. And by the way, like, when I'm coaching at camps, especially in the summer, like when I'm traveling around the world, like, I have to tell kids it's okay to smile because they've been taught, unintentionally, I believe most of the time, that basketball or sport is really serious.
Yeah, this is serious. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, we have to create this psychological safety for them to be themselves and to be able to have fun. And again, it's this balance between intensity and comfort. Right? Like, yeah, we want intensity. Yeah, we want you to play hard. But can't you do that and still enjoy yourself? Well, I think so. I think competition is fun. That's why most players are playing still basketball or a sport at the high school level, is because they like competition. And then I'd say the second area that is fun is seeing themselves improve. And we just simply don't spend enough time on that as a coach, about noticing when a player improves. And it could be from bad to okay. It could be from okay to good, from good to great. And we know those steps are a little harder as you get better. But just how much time a week do you spend noticing that your player couldn't do something as well last week and now can do something better this week?
I think that's where sometimes practice plans can get in the way for me. If I have these rigid times and this long checklist that I have to go through, I will be fine. I find myself, this is a few years ago, I've gotten away from it more. I found myself really not even focused too much on what's on the floor, more of, how's our time? Are we getting through this? Can we move on? Are we good? Can we go? And then I can't imagine how many of those moments that you just talked about that I missed, being a slave to the plan or moving on for moving on's sake.
So here's what I would write on my practice plan. And maybe just this is my practice plan, is you're okay and you belong. So that would remind me every day to tell every player that you're okay and you belong in some context. And that my first interaction with a player on the day I'm going to coach them is not a coaching moment. It's something about, hey, those shoes are really cool, or something about, hey, how did the test go? Like, it's something non-basketball because I want to value them as a person. And then obviously there would be something on there about noticing progress. And it would be those three things every day that I just want to do for every player, is I want to notice progress and something they couldn't do, but they can do a little bit better. And it could be just a quick short burst and say, hey, Matt, like, you're so much more balanced on your closeouts, keeping the ball in front, than you were last week. Boom, move on. But they now know that you value them, they belong, and also that you're noticing that their work is leading to improvement. And isn't it that's ultimately our goal beyond winning and losing, obviously, is developing people, but also that your players can connect. That's what we worked on. Like, for me, if I spend all my time in practice connecting for a player, your hard work is leading to this, then won't they value hard work and we don't have to talk about it anymore? Because they know it leads to something. And too often we just say hard work and, work hard. And, well, what are we connecting that to?
Yeah. And what if in thinking that way too, we become more fun to be around? We enjoy practice more ourselves, because with that shift in your focus, you're really looking for the positives that they're doing. But because I think so many, especially early on when I was starting out, my eyes just were darting around and looking for negatives, for things that I have to hit right there. That's a big shift though for a lot of people.
It's definitely a big shift, but it's so doable. We can all do it. And I think intuitively we all want to do it. And I think, again, like coaches, there's been false narratives about coaches perpetuated for years. And that intensity trumps everything, right? Our intensity, the player's intensity, that will solve all problems if we just work harder and we do things more. And, if you've read a lot of Eastern philosophy or different things like that, I mean, it's a big difference between let it happen and make it happen. And too often we consider let it happen giving up, right? But that's not it. It's actually relaxing. And we try and frame it for players too. And truthfully, for me as a coach, I have the same struggles you just talked about. I still do, that I'm too intense and I have to calm myself to be a teacher rather than a coach. And that's a big thing. But I tell players all the time, offense is played best at 70%. It's not played best at 100%, and 110%. I would never share that as a narrative. Like, it just doesn't exist. You play better when you're relaxed. Play at 70% on offense. Maybe it's 80, 90% on defense, in terms of phrasing it. But for me as a coach, I'm a much better coach at 70% than I'm 100%. And that's just a way of kind of framing it. I'm not sure if that's actually true in terms of those numbers. So nobody go question those numbers, make up your own. But for me, that helps me understand.
It makes sense. It makes sense. You go 100% on defense, you're probably fouling.
Totally.
You go,
or you're making mistakes. Offense, you're over pursuing
the ball. Yeah. And what are the moments I regret most as a coach from this past season? Probably the moments when I was going 100% on an official or 100% on one of my players, where my wife, who does our book, after the game goes, Matt, your face that one time when you were looking at that kid. Those are those moments I wish I could take back. So what a great nugget there, Coach.
Thank you.
Thank you for checking out today's episode. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, share it with your fellow coaches, and find us on social media for what's coming up next on the JAMODI podcast. It's just a matter of doing it.